Hello, welcome to another screen recording lecture from Mr. Moser's American History 8 class. The purpose of today's lecture is a look at kind of the cultural life of Native American tribes living on the Great Plains. The textbook pages readings for this particular lecture comes from Chapter 18, Section 2, pages 593 to 598. The section title is called Wars for the West. Guiding questions for today is, what is a reservation? What was the culture of the tribes living on the Great Plains? And what was the significance of the buffalo? So let's talk a little bit about some of these Native American tribes living on the Great Plains. After 1830s, most treaties with the Native American people promised land of everything really west of the Missouri and Mississippi River. If you look here at this line here on the map in 1830, here's the Mississippi River right here. Here's the Missouri River right there. So everything kind of west of that line, that kind of darkened gray zone region, was kind of land generally pretty much left alone for the Native Americans. But in 1848 and 1849, something drastically changes all that and really creates a huge interest in Western settlement, and that was the fact that gold was discovered in California. So in 1848, when gold is discovered in California, and then in 1849, in the California gold rush with the 49ers flooding out to the west, this is going to have a drastic impact on a lot of different tribes living out on the western parts of the United States. Now remember that when we talk about Native Americans, there are literally hundreds of tribes of Native American groups that lived in America during this time period in the 1800s. And this map here kind of looks at really a large cross-section of some of the various tribes throughout this time period. And each tribe is very unique. Each tribe has its own traditions, cultures, and aspects that make it very different from each other. So we can't just kind of lump all of them together and just say Native Americans. However, and for the purpose of our area of settlement in this part of the country, here in the Great Plains, the Midwest region, up here in kind of this region here, we're going to kind of focus more so on the culture of these tribes that lived in this part of the country and kind of the impact that Western migration had on them. If we if we think about the tribes in the 1800s, these are the different tribes and the different kind of tribal claims that existed here in the 1800s. And you can see each tribe kind of carved out its own kind of distinctive area and region of the Western Plains. But if we look at this map and we look at what happens to Native American land during this period of westward expansion and manifest destiny, we can sort of see that the amount of land, kind of think about how that land changes over time. What happens to the size of that land held by Native Americans? Yeah, definitely. You can see that the land decreases quite drastically, actually, between 1850 to the end of Manifest Destiny here in 1880, where Native American land claims are smaller and smaller and smaller. And even if we look at today's map, and even though this says 1990, this would be the same today, we see small pockets of Native American land that's held on by their control. So what are those little pieces of land called? Well, they're called reservations, and that's a policy that the U.S. government had during westward expansion and kind of continues to this day. It's reservation is land specifically set aside for Native Americans. The idea during Manifest Destiny and westward expansion was to get the Native Americans generally from roaming on the Great Plains and in their territory that they lived from and put them on specific land that was set aside just for them. Now that land typically was a pretty poor quality. Native Americans, some were farmers. Most of the ones that we'll be talking about on the Great Plains were mostly nomadic and hunters and gatherers, means that they hunted their food and gathered their food and supplies. Trying to farm was rather difficult and it didn't work very well. So a lot of the reservation lands that Native Americans were placed onto wasn't necessarily always that of the best quality. Most of the Native Americans living on the Great Plains had what's called a nomadic lifestyle, meaning that they traveled from place to place. They did not settle in one location for very long. Typically, they moved from location to location, typically following the large herds of American bison, buffalo, that roam the Great Plains. Not all Native Americans lived in teepees, but the ones living on the Great Plains, many did, because they were something very easily to set up and very easily to take down and move from location to location as they traveled across the Great Plains. And again, not all Native Americans lived in teepees, but the ones living on the Great Plains, at least, those groups did. So why did they follow the buffalo? What was the reason behind this? Well, really, the buffalo was their one-stop shopping center for everything that they possibly could ever need or want. It was things that they had not just for food, but also for shelter, clothing, tools, and equipment. So there's lots of different resources we can look at here for the Native Americans and how they use these different resources. They use obviously the skin or the hide for clothing, teepee covers. They use the meat also for food, of course. They use the bones for tools. They use the stomach for containers and buckets and pots. They use the tongue, and they ate the tongue, but they liked it as a delicacy. The skull was used in religious ceremonies, and the brain, which is kind of crushed up and smeared along the hide, was used in helping tan the leather and make the hide into leather. So as you can see here, really almost everything of the buffalo was pretty much used by the Native Americans. In class, we watched the video for Dances with Wolves that looked at kind of that importance of the buffalo hunt. Everything was used. The hunters would go and kill the buffalo, and then the whole tribe would come in and they would actually take the parts of the animal, and every part of the buffalo was used. Nothing went to waste in that Native American culture. For the tribes living on the Great Plains, because the buffalo was so important to life on the Great Plains, it really was the center of their spiritual life. It was their food, their clothing, their shelter, but it was also part of their spirituality. They're connecting to nature and their cultural religion of practices or spiritual nature of being one with nature and with the land. The video clip we have here is that of Thomas Edison, of an actual Native American buffalo dance. This is part of their version of praying. This would be how they would bring the buffalo to them so they could hunt and gather them and get what they needed from those animals for their existence, for their livelihood. So again, Native Americans had a lot of different kind of tribes, different kinds of culture, all kinds of languages, traditions, and customs. But for the tribes living here on the Great Plains, kind of the Midwest region, mostly they were nomadic. They searched and moved and searched for the herds of buffalo that numbered in the millions. They used them for all their different resources. This was the culture that existed here in this part of the country on the Great Plains in North America before all the settlement. In the coming lectures, we're going to kind of look at and see how this cultural contact is going to lead to some tensions and conflict throughout manifest destiny and westward expansion. So thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the lecture. As always, if you have questions, please make sure you let us know. Thank you.